Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to tackle a word that's been buzzing around everywhere, from finance to art, and that word is blockchain. You know, it promises to completely change how we trust each other online, but what is it really? Let's break it down and demystify it together.
So here's our game plan. We're going to slice this into 5 simple, easy-to-digest parts. First, we'll talk about the core problem blockchain was built to solve. Then, we'll peek under the hood to see how it actually works. After that, we'll explore the different types, see where it's already popping up in your life, and finally, we'll take a really honest look at its future, the good and the bad.
All right, let's dive right in. See, to really get your head around blockchain, you first have to understand the problem it was designed to fix. And that all comes down to the challenge of trust in our digital world.
Just think about it for a second. So much of what we do online relies on a middleman. You trust your bank to manage your money. You trust a giant tech company to host your photos and data. You trust a government to verify who you are. These are all central authorities. Blockchain was born from this really simple but kind of radical question. What if we didn't need them? What if we could build that trust without a middleman?
And blockchain's answer to that question is this amazing technology that's kind of like a shared magic notebook. Imagine that every single person in a network has an identical copy of this notebook. Whenever something new happens, like a transaction, it gets written down in every single person's notebook at the exact same time. No one person is in charge, and this is the really crucial part. Once a page is written, it can never, ever be erased.
So now we know why it exists. Pretty cool, right? But now let's pop the hood and see exactly how this shared digital notebook actually gets written. This is where the chain part of blockchain really comes to life.
At its most basic level, everything begins with one of these, a block. Honestly, you can just think of a block as a container, like a digital box where a bunch of new transactions or pieces of info are gathered up.
So how does a new entry get into that magic notebook for good? Well, it's a fascinating little dance. First, someone requests a transaction, and that request gets blasted out to this huge network of independent computers, which we call nodes. These nodes act like thousands of tiny accountants, all checking the books to make sure the transaction is legit. Once they all agree, that whole block of transactions gets sealed with a unique digital fingerprint, that's the hash. And then it's literally changed to the block that came before it. Only then, bam, it's added to the ledger for the whole world to see, forever.
And here's the kicker. This is the whole point. That cryptographic chain linking all the blocks together means that if you wanted to go back and change just one tiny detail from the past, you'd have to break not just its block, but every single block that came after it, across thousands of computers, all at once. It's practically impossible. And this creates a record that is permanent and unchangeable. The technical term is immutable.
Okay, now that we've got the mechanics down, it's super important to understand that blockchain isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Not at all. Different situations call for totally different kinds of chains.
You've really got 3 main flavors. On one end, there are public blockchains, like Bitcoin. You can think of this as the Wild West. It's totally open, anyone can join in and participate. On the complete opposite end, you've got private blockchains, which a single company might run for its own internal stuff, keeping everything locked down. And then right in the middle, you have consortium chains, where a select group of organizations, say a bunch of banks or shipping companies, get together and agree to share a ledger just among themselves.
And this is where it gets really interesting, where all this theory starts to meet reality. I mean, most people hear blockchain and their brain immediately jumps to cryptocurrency. But that's just the very first, most famous use case. This underlying tech is being put to work in some pretty surprising places.
So beyond just sending money around, the world of finance is using things called smart contracts. This is basically code that automatically executes an agreement when certain conditions are met. Think about an insurance policy that automatically pays out the second your flight is officially delayed, with no human approval needed. We see it with digital assets, where NFTs use the blockchain to prove without a doubt that you are the one and only owner of a piece of digital art. And there are even experiments in creating voting systems that are totally transparent and virtually impossible to tamper with.
And its impact just keeps growing. In supply chains, you can now scan a QR code on a bag of coffee and literally trace its entire journey, from the specific farm it was grown on all the way to your cup. In healthcare, it could give you total control over your medical records, allowing you to grant temporary, secure access to different doctors when you need to. And maybe biggest of all, it's the bedrock of this whole new idea called Web3, a new version of the internet built not on servers owned by giant companies, but on decentralized apps, or DApps, that put the users back in control.
So yeah, the potential is absolutely enormous. But, just like any powerful new technology, it is not a magic bullet.
it's got some serious challenges. So let's take a balanced, clear-eyed look at the road ahead.
The promise is crystal clear. A world with more trust, lower costs because you're cutting out all those middlemen, and totally new ways of doing business. But on the flip side, we're facing some pretty tough hurdles. Some of the older blockchains use a staggering amount of energy. Governments are still scratching their heads trying to figure out how to regulate it all, and it's not totally clear yet if the technology can scale up to handle the billions of transactions a global system would demand.
Let's just zoom in on that energy problem for a second, because it's a big one, and a valid criticism. The original method for getting everyone to agree, called proof of work, which is what Bitcoin uses, is incredibly energy-hungry on purpose. But the technology isn't standing still. A lot of the newer blockchains have shifted to a system called proof of stake, which, as you can see, uses just a tiny fraction of the energy, directly tackling one of the technology's biggest headaches.
You know, this quote really captures where we are perfectly. Blockchain is growing up. It's moving from being this niche experiment to becoming a potential new foundational layer of our entire digital world. We're getting past all the initial crazy hype, and we're now in the early days of actually figuring out what we can build on this thing.
So we'll leave you with this question to chew on. This technology, it offers a fundamentally new foundation for how we interact, how we own things, and how we trust each other online. The tools are being built right now. The code is being written as we speak. So the real question isn't whether it can work anymore. The question is, what will we, as a society, choose to build with it? Thanks for tuning in.